Hello, this is Jessica, and we are going to work the practice problems for Chapter 7. Let's start with number 2 because it's simple. Company ABC is going to pay a dividend of $2.50 next year. Dividends are expected to grow at 4% indefinitely. If the required return is 10%, what is the value of this stock? Because dividends are going to grow at a constant rate forever, we can use the constant growth rate formula. The price today is equal to the next dividend payable divided by the required return minus the growth rate. Company ABC is going to pay a dividend of $2.50. That would be the next dividend payable, so D1. So that's $2.50 divided by the required return of 10% minus the growth rate of 4%. So $2.50 divided by 6%. And it's $41.67. Number 3 is very similar. Number 3 says Company DEF just paid a dividend of $2. Dividends are expected to grow at 5% forever, and the required return is 3%. What is the value of this stock? So again, dividends are going to grow at a constant rate forever, so we can use the constant growth rate formula. The only difference here is that this problem gives you the last dividend paid. So this has been just paid. So because it's just paid, that is D naught. And we do not use D naught in calculations. But we can use D naught to calculate the next dividend payable. D1. D1 is equal to D naught times 1 plus the growth rate. So the next dividend payable is equal to the last dividend paid plus 1 times 1 plus the growth rate. So here the last dividend paid is $2 times 1 plus the growth rate of 5% gives you $2.10. Okay, so we've calculated the next dividend payable of $2.10. So now we can use our constant growth rate model to calculate the price of the stock today. Remember, the price of the stock today is equal to the next dividend payable over R minus G. So that's $2.10 divided by the required return of 8% minus the growth rate of 5%. We can use this formula because the growth rate is constant forever. Here, remember, whenever you're using a formula, that you need to be sure and enter your percentages as a percentage, not a whole number. So this is $2.10 divided by 3%. 210 divided by 3%. 210, sorry, try it one more time. Divided by 3% is $70. So now we can go back to number 1, the most difficult of the problems. Here we see Company XYZ just paid a dividend of $1.50. Again, we see those words just paid. Because they have just been paid, then $1.50 is D naught. It won't be included in our calculations. It's only there to allow us to calculate the next dividend payable. Dividends are expected to grow at 3% a year for the next 4 years. After that, the growth rate will be a constant 1% forever. The required return is 5%. What is the value of this stock? So we're wanting to know the value of the stock at time period 0. From time period 0 to time period 1, the growth rate is 3%. From time period 1 to time period 2, the growth rate is also 3%. So at time period 1, dividend 1 is equal to the last dividend paid times 1 plus the growth rate. We use the growth rate associated with this time period. So that's $1.50 times 1 plus 3%. To give us 1.545. From time period 2 to time period 3, it's going to grow at 3%. So we have our last dividend paid times 1 plus the growth rate of 3%. To give us 1.59. From time period 2 to time period 3, the growth rate is still a constant 3%. So we have 1.59 times 1 plus this constant growth of 3%. So we get 1.64. From time period 3 to time period 4, our growth rate is still 3%. So we have 1.64 times 1 plus our 3% growth rate to give us 1.69. After time period 4, the growth rate becomes a constant 1%. So we need to calculate the dividend at one period past where the growth rate becomes constant. So we have 1.69, our last dividend paid, times 1 plus 1% to give us $1.71. So because our growth rate has become constant, after time period 4, we could use the constant growth rate model at time period 4. This is the present value of all future dividends. So the price at time period 4 is equal to the dividend at time period 5 divided by the R minus G. So the dividend at time period 5 is $1.71. Our required return is 5%. And we use the growth rate, the constant growth rate, the 1%. So $1.71 divided by 4% is $42.67. So now that we've calculated the price at time period 4, which is the present value of all future dividends after time period 4, we can ignore any dividends that come after time period 4. So now the only relevant cash flows are those associated with time periods 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can use our cash flow worksheet. Our cash flow at time period 0, there are no cash flows associated with time period 0, so that's 0. Our cash flow at time period 1, we only have one cash flow associated with time period 1. That's dividend 1. That's $1.59. Cash flow at time period 2. Oh, I'm sorry, that was $1.55. Excuse me. $1.55. I was looking at the wrong time period. Our cash flow at time period 2, there's only one cash flow associated with the second time period, So that's dividend 2, and that's $1.59. Our cash flow at time period 3, there's only one cash flow associated with time period 3, and that is dividend 3, which is $1.64. And our cash flow at time period 4, there are two payments associated with time period 4. We have the dividend at time period 4 that we will receive. We also know the price at time period 4, so the present value of all future dividends. So dividend 4 plus the value of the stock at time period 4. So $1.69 plus $42.67. That gives you $44.36. So we put this into our cash flow worksheet on our calculator. Remember, you push the cash flow button, and to clear out the cash flow worksheet, we push second and clear work. Our cash flow at time period 0 was 0, so enter in the down arrow. Cash flow at time period 1 is dividend 1, $1.55. Enter. Down arrow. We can skip frequencies, so down arrow again. Cash flow at time period 2 is dividend at time period 2, $1.59. Enter. Down arrow twice. Cash flow at time period 3 is dividend 3, $1.64. Enter. Down arrow twice. And cash flow at time period 4 is dividend 4 plus the value of the stock at time period 4, so the $44.36. Enter. Now this is just like what we did in Chapter 5, unequal cash flows. So we push the NPV button, and we enter in our discount rates, the required return as a whole number, 5. Enter, down arrow, and compute. So this stock today is worth $40.83. The next step, NPV, IY equals 5, and we get NPV, or the price today, to be $40.83. So if you have a graphing calculator, you would enter in NPV, open parentheses, your discount rate, comma, your cash flow at time period 0, comma, braces, and your cash flows. So $1.55 at time period 1, $1.59 at time period 2, $1.64 at time period 3, and $44.36 at time period 4, close braces, close parentheses. The general layout for NPV on a graphing calculator is interest rate, comma, cash flow at time period 0, comma, you can't forget the comma or you will get an error, braces, cash flow at time period 1, time period 2, etc. Each of these separated by commas, close braces, and close parentheses. Please let me know if you have any additional questions. I have already done a video for the second set of practice problems.